Emerging first in February of 2005, YouTube has been a prominent service for hosting original video content. Since being purchased by Google in October of 2006, YouTube has occupied a prominent space within popular media. There's a kind of democratizing factor to YouTube, as the production of media content in the digital age is now no longer exclusively curated by what is considered marketable, or limited to those who have access to expensive technology. Now, for the first time, a piece of filmed media could, in theory, start from nothing and gain cultural traction purely through its own merit or relevance. The reach of these texts should not be ignored, as some content on this platform has grown to become more recognizable than some films or television shows that have major industries backing them. And that means that YouTube can now carry that same level of cultural influence. YouTube as a platform has been building this base of content for over a decade now, and has evolved trends, modes, genres, and communities within that base. These include communities like gamer YouTube or Let's Plays, genres like the unboxing video or cooking channels, or narrative content such as sketch comedy or web series.
Sometimes things that are expensive are worse.
But what I want to talk about specifically today is the YouTube video essay. This is a mode that bills itself as a kind of lecture, choosing a topic and then talking at the viewer to educate them and often present the findings of the author's own research or analysis. This is a mode that has been growing in prevalence recently, with multiple channels devoted to essays that cover film, video games, politics, and more. This mode of YouTube video, the video essay, kind of shares its name with a mode of cinema, the essay film. Described by the term essay film is a loosely connected series of texts that rise and fall in frequency throughout film history, but were particularly prominent during periods like the French New Wave in the 1960s or the introduction of CD-ROM in the 1990s. This kind of gets a bit confusing though, doesn't it? Because the phrases video essay and essay film sound like they should mean basically the same thing. But they don't. Each are the result of vastly different artistic traditions. The essay film arose out of the combined modes of art cinema and documentary, whereas the video essay arose out of, well, kind of out of vlogging. But both of these forms are identifying themselves as essays that have been filmed and are understood by viewers through the context of the essay form. So is the similarity between these two purely semantic? Or is there something else that's going on here? In order to answer this, I want to examine a particular sub-community of specifically political, specifically leftist YouTube video essays, often referred to affectionately as LeftTube, or bread tube, or those degenerate politically correct SJW cucks who are indoctrinating my child into the soy boy cultural Marxist gay agenda, and extrapolate from these texts stylistic techniques that they have in common with the essay film tradition that came before. It is tempting when discussing LeftTube to engage with these texts politically, discussing the arguments they are making, who they are making them for, and whether or not what they present is a truth that will one day save us all from the darkness. But I'm not going to do that. I mean, sure, that's kind of the most prominent thing about them a lot of the time. Many of these texts are using YouTube just as a platform to share leftist political theory that would not typically be distributed in mainstream cultural products. But for us here today, well, I don't want to divorce these texts from the politics behind them altogether. What I want to focus on in these videos is their form, their style, their aesthetic. Because these texts are not just propaganda indoctrinating your children into a politically correct, postmodern, neo-Marxist, Antifa death cult. This is an emerging art form with a set of common stylistic devices that influence, build upon, and expand one another's ideas, not just theoretical ideas, but aesthetic ideas as well. Take, for example, one particular trend, in which the narrator pours some kind of sauce or liquid on their face. This is an aesthetic idea that originated in videos from ContraPoints because, in her words, milk looks like semen and she wanted to pour it on her face because she thought it would be funny to pour milk on her face. Yet this aesthetic idea has been picked up and repeated not only by ContraPoints herself in other videos, but by PhilosophyTube, by Mia Mulder, and probably a lot more, but there are only so many people I can cover, and some are just going to get left out, so I'm trying my best, but I'm really sorry, almost as a kind of nod towards one another. Mulder even acknowledges the action as a kind of entrance into the leftist YouTube community.
This was a really bad idea. Why did I do this?
From the perspective of argumentation, this is kind of counterintuitive. It's absurd, it's surreal, it's silly. In academic discourse, this would encourage your audience to take you, as a speaker of supposed authority on the matter at hand, less seriously. This is not a practical choice. It is purely an aesthetic choice. These, and many other stylistic devices, are in the process of being explored, developed, and expanded upon within the context of this online community. What they represent is the logical progression of the artistic impulses of the essay film in a contemporary context, demonstrating that essayistic cinema does not merely result from internal influences from within the French New Wave, but might actually be a naturally occurring and organically developing stylistic mode. But clearly, I'm not just here to theorize around this mode of moving image production. In case it wasn't obvious, I am submitting my final paper to a graduate film studies course on the essay film as a video. I am interested in exploring these aesthetic ideas not just theoretically, but practically. I want to understand them, connect with them, get inside of them. This is an opportunity to engage with the aesthetic qualities of these videos from the perspective of the videos themselves. And that is the kind of opportunity that you could say I very much relish.
I let the hatchet in the cold ground pull me down. Midnight, take the wheel, my head is reeling, I surrender. I'm looking for a dangerous adventure. Midnight, teach me how to feel, you choose the destination.
Part 1. History of the essay. Back in high school, you probably learned that an essay was a form of argumentative writing, based largely around you doing a whole lot of research into a topic and demonstrating your newfound knowledge by structuring it around a cohesive argument intended to persuade your reader to agree with the conclusion that you wanted them to come to. Your high school teachers probably repeated to you at any opportunity how an essay is not an essay without a thesis statement. That the definition of an essay, the thing that makes a piece of writing fundamentally essayistic, is the core argument that you are making as concisely and convincingly as possible, returning throughout your paper to this central idea so that you can hammer it home to your reader. Even if the essay is this one that I wrote in my undergrad comparing High School Musical to the Swedish drama Fucking Åmål. Let's be honest with ourselves, I peaked as an academic when I wrote this paper, and my entire career since has just been me trying to top this. Thanks for remembering back to high school. Now forget all that, because I'm coming at you from the operating thetan level of academia, and here in academia, we like to take words that are specific and useful and grounded in reality, and make them vague and meaningless and confusing because we all hate ourselves and secretly wish we had chosen a career path that did not require us to constantly remind ourselves that we are smart all the time. So I guess this means that in order to understand the version of the essay film that we're talking about, we need to return not to high school, but to the origin of the essay as a literary form, and a French dude named Michel de Montaigne. Montaigne was a 16th century philosopher who wrote a bunch of kind of stream of consciousness ramblings with topics such as On Fear, about the practicality of fear as an emotion, pulling partly from his own experiences in war. Or To Philosophize is to Learn How to Die, which actually, that one sounds pretty self-explanatory. He also wrote on the fundamental inconsistency of human behavior, and his bowel movements, and his preferred sex position. Actually, this guy was, he was a little weird. These essays were highly influential and popular within French culture in and around the 1580s, having deep influences on the Enlightenment and French Revolution. These writings established the essay as a wide-ranging form of intellectual meandering, asking fundamental questions about the human condition and overlapping fact, fiction, and social critique. These writings have been described as creating an atmosphere of contradiction and collision of opposites, and hold a kind of playful or teasing nature that, according to Nora, influenced the essay as a literary form going forward. For any of us who had to write a high school research paper, this probably sounds highly questionable. Any of these essays would probably result in a solid D+ from any high school teacher, but they were considered extremely popular and highly influential in 16th century France. And as a result, the form of the essay was reproduced, evolving into a number of different genres of writing, many of which were calling themselves essays. The essay as a literary form has thus emerged throughout history, usually in a time of vaguely defined crisis. In the 1910s, for example, the essay became a response to modernist art movement. In the 1930s, it was a means of socio-political critique in an increasingly unstable intellectual landscape. And after World War II, the essay was an instrument of critical thought in the wake of a cultural catastrophe. Like anything that has been around since the 1580s, this form has experienced a lot of evolution, and has branched out to include a number of different forms, which, yes, does include the high school research paper, but it also includes the essay film. So I guess that means that we now need to ask, Part 2. So what the hell is an essay film? The essay film can be a bit difficult to define, but is best thought of as a kind of hybrid.
Like a hybrid.
The essay film is essentially a meeting ground between the impulses of documentary, avant-garde, and art film traditions, existing at a midpoint between the argumentative and the creative. The essay film is often about representing the act of solving a theoretical problem, but it is the way that it goes about solving this problem that supposedly makes it essayistic, adopting a subjective position marked by ambiguity and a specific authorial voice, making it more interested in representing the process of thinking in a self-reflexive way than it is interested in reaching definitive conclusions. In theory, this ties the essay film back to Montaigne, as it is wandering and exploratory more than it is structured and factual. The essay film has emerged with varying degrees of prominence since the 1960s. Filmmakers have turned to the form as a political critique, as a mode of self-reflexive filmmaking, or as even a personal probe. As Nora puts it, the essay film responds immediately and directly to current crises by adopting either a subjective position or one marked by ambiguity. Common examples of the essay film include Chris Marker's film Letters from Siberia, which is essentially a playful trip through Siberia, complete with romantic meanderings about crane workers and animated interludes about the advantages of having a pet reindeer.
Are you dissatisfied with your car? Reindeer will transport you.
Agnes Varda's The Gleaners and I, a documentary about French people who scavenge the leftovers of others, subtly critiquing capitalism in the process. Jean-Luc Godard's Histoire du cinéma, a 4-hour-long meander through the history of cinema that's a little bit more metaphorical, shall we say, than it is informative. This is a category that becomes a bit tricky, however, because there's a level of disagreement and contradictory testimony around what does or does not qualify as an essay film. Michael Moore, for example, is a filmmaker whose work is often referenced as essayistic because his films are largely political, are structured around a real-world problem that the film proposes to resolve, and are imbued with Moore's distinct voice within the text of the film as a subjective author. However, on this there are prominent essay film theorists who disagree. Laura Rascaroli, for example, has argued that because Moore will often not present a specifically reflexive approach to the problems covered in his films, not problematize the role of his own authorship, and direct his viewers to reach a definitive conclusion by the end of the film, Moore is therefore a journalist, not an essayist. There is also a prominent level of disagreement over whether or not the essay film should... What's a scholarly way to say this? Make any goddamn sense! See, the essay film pulls a lot of influence from traditions of art cinema, and will rarely follow a clear narrative trajectory. An essay film is typically much more fragmentary in its narrative structure, wandering, accidental, and devoid of any attempts to advance a substantial claim towards truth in favor of exploring the process of reaching its own ideas. Not emphasizing the ideas themselves, but the means by which it is getting there. This can also mean that a common aesthetic device of the essay film is, well, I guess if this is a YouTube video, then I don't exactly need other film scholars to take me seriously. Weird shit!
Visit the heads frequently, often on romantic rambles. Lovers gather to sit among, or even on, the frozen heads for picnics, or to spoon beneath the moonlit dome of our city.
Entre le souvenir et l'oubli, Cocoloco parle!
If he was struck by a single ray of light, he died, instantly. And the proof of this, said the Chinese, who were strong on logic, was that whenever you met a mammoth in the open, it was dead.
I mean, okay, yes, the distinction of what makes an essay film or an art film cannot be boiled down to weird shit, but this is a notable quality that a lot of essay films have that they have in common with a lot of video essays. But okay, maybe we need to start talking about some of these video essays, because this has been getting a little bit abstract. This has been getting a little bit too academic for me, and I think it would help us a lot to be able to focus in on a case study. Why not one of the most influential and creatively rich channels currently producing this kind of content? Part 3, ContraPoints, a case study. Hosted, written, and produced almost entirely by ex-PhD candidate Natalie Wynn, ContraPoints is a YouTube channel described by Wynn as holding the specific intention to de-radicalize online spaces and communities that in the past few years have drifted further and further towards the far right.
People don't believe because of facts and evidence. They believe things because they're part of a story that they tell themselves. And so I guess part of what I'm doing is understanding those stories in understanding psychologically why are these stories being told.
What differentiates ContraPoints from most other political content on the internet is Wynn's talent for kind of speaking the same language as the people who will be the most inclined to disagree with her. The ContraPoints channel will often make satirical use of reactionary buzzwords like SJW or degenerate or political correctness, but also not take these concepts at face value. Wynne, for example, will lean into right-wing perceptions of her as being degenerate, as a source for comedy, but then turn around and unpack degeneracy as a concept and its origins in one of her videos. She will allow for the concession that to some what is narrativized as political correctness could feel stifling, but will then make 2 videos destabilizing the narrative that the left hates free speech. Wynne consistently anticipates arguments that could be raised in response to those she is making, and provides in return contrary points. She literally made this joke in one of her videos too. I really need better material. I'm sorry. Another key strength of ContraPoint's channel is that Wynne has recognized that the current political landscape is, to use her words, kind of a circus.
The President of the United States is a reality TV star. The 21st century is an aesthetic century. In history, there are ages of reason and there are ages of spectacle, and it's important to know which you're in. Our America, our internet, is not ancient Athens, it's Rome. And your problem is you think you're in the forum when you're really in the circus.
The adoption of kind of avant-garde techniques, or to use some more appropriate scholarly language, weird shit, therefore serves a specific function to situate these texts within the context of this political circus. That if the validity of ideas in the current social landscape is determined by what is able to command the most performative absurdity, Natalie Wynne's videos will command that attention to the topics that she believes deserves it by just kind of out-absurding everyone else. Some of the techniques that Wynne uses to do this are stylistic, and we'll get to those in a moment, but others are structural, such as her use of characters. These characters don't really operate the way that one would expect from a traditional narrative context. They don't really have wants or motivations or stories to participate in. They don't experience arcs, really, and are largely two-dimensional, defined exclusively in relation to the ideological framework that Wynne is looking to explore, critique, or give a voice to. The presence of these characters recalls the Socratic dialogue, a form that Wynne is obviously familiar with given her philosophy background, but one that has also been cited by Timothy Corrigan as the format after which essayistic thinking was modeled in literature. ContraPoint's use of characters is also similar to a prominent tension within the essay film as described by Laura Rascaroli, as being that between the roles of the author, the narrator, and the enunciator, and how these 3 things are not always the same. The author, of course, is the person making the thing, the creative voice behind it and the source of the ideas. The enunciator is the representation of the author's views, as conveyed through the essay, establishing a dialogue between the film and the spectator, and addressing that spectator in a direct and challenging manner. The narrator, meanwhile, is the fictionalized perspective that the essay is being delivered through. ContraPoint's characters often act as essayistic narrators, adopting a perspective that Wynne herself may not agree with in order to explore the views that they represent. Sometimes, very rarely, Wynne will appear as herself in a video, blurring that line between author, enunciator, and narrator. When she does this, however, she often introduces herself as if she were one of her own characters.
Hi, I'm Natalie Wynne, biological woman.
As if her viewpoints should not be privileged over those that she is engaging with, but instead as a way to indicate that the perspective being delivered is her own, and not one that she is intending to critique or to satirize. Yet ContraPoints has other stylistic devices that, as promised, are less structural and more aesthetic, such as mood lighting or brief tangential asides, some of which are comical.
No, I don't want a landline. No one under the age of 60 wants a landline.
Others of which are maybe more experimental. One of the most recognizable stylistic devices Wynne uses is costume design, a device that you may notice I am emulating very poorly. These are eye-catching ensembles that can often function representationally in relation to her arguments, such as the half-drag look used in her video Are Trapped Gay that subtextually clarifies for a viewer who may have limited experience with trans women the difference between a drag performance and what an actual trans woman may look like. These stylistic devices can all be categorized within a common theme of ContraPoint's channel, that being performativity. The ideas that Natalie Wynn is engaging with are not merely presented or argued or explored, they are performed. They are dressed up and delivered to the viewer as spectacle. Laura Rascaroli cites performativity as a key element to the essay film, something that specifically helps to highlight the distance between the film and its subject matter. This element of performativity is central to Wynn's style. Just as Judith Butler argued that drag fundamentally mocks our expectations around the expression of gender and the notion of a true gender identity, Wynn takes a kind of drag performance approach to engaging with ideas. I don't just mean the literal drag performances that are littered throughout her channel, by the way, but how she dresses up the ideas she is exploring in a kind of satirical attitude that almost parodies the very notion of ideas in the first place.
Reason, power, truth. These are the kinds of topics that I simply don't care about. Unfortunately, we have to talk about them because of a guy named Jordan Peterson. So who's Jordan Peterson?
The satirical voice with which Wynn presents her ideas as a parody on the essential assumptions behind the notion of ideas has been present in ContraPoint since very early on in the channel. What has developed organically is the stylistic performativity that evolved slowly over the course of her early videos, from a style modeled after a more traditional talking head format intercut with Google image search results, and into a theatrical celebration of stylistic excess and hyperbole. These essayistic elements of Wynn's style reach a turning point in her video Gender Dysphoria, in which her narrational voice not only becomes much closer to Montaigne than to the high school research paper, but becomes closer to the likes of Marker or Godard or Varda than they have ever been before or since. This video is essentially a 15-minute long experimental film in which Wynn drops the persuasive or argumentative component that is present in her other videos to explore instead a montage of representational sequences that make abstract her own transition and experience with dysphoria.
It's not even human hair. It's like insect hair.
Ironically, this is simultaneously the closest that ContraPoints or any other leftist YouTuber has come to the form of the essay film proper. Yet it is also the farthest Wynn's channel has diverted from what is expected of a proper video essay. This particular text feels almost out of place within the context of Wynn's other videos. Her voice is still there, but it feels disconnected from the theory or ideas that we are used to seeing conveyed with decisive clarity. It feels almost like an amalgamation of all the performative elements of her style that has had the backbone of structure or argumentation stripped away. What this tension in this video demonstrates, I think, is that there is a distinction between the essay film and the video essay that is not purely semantic. The two are evolving from very different places and are easy to distinguish from one another. Gender Dysphoria may have evolved out of Wynn's existing style, which evolved itself out of the vlog, but the video also begins by ironically situating itself within a tradition of art cinema, by opening on the intertitle that reads Ein Film von ContraPoints, to satirically place itself within the art cinema mode, yet also indicate that the non-narrative, non-linear nature of the following video is intended on some level to connect itself to an existing cinematic tradition. But while this indicates a distinction between the essay film and video essay, it also serves as a kind of bridge between them. The art cinema influences observable in gender dysphoria are not confined to that video, but are the culmination of stylistic techniques that Wynne had used previously. Techniques that bleed out into and become more pronounced in her later videos as well. This one video can be seen almost as a kind of point of convergence between these two paths of aesthetic influence. That as the essay form branched out from Montaigne and into different directions, evolving into the essay film out of art cinema and into the video essay out of the vlog, gender dysphoria is the moment that these two forms reconvened and began to speak more directly to one another. It is also around this time where ContraPoints as a channel starts to take off in popularity, leading to a growing pattern of influence amongst other YouTube video essays. Part 4. What about the rest of LeftTube? Okay, yeah, so I'm in the bathtub right now, fine. But do you know what? I'm on a budget. I don't have those sweet, sweet Patreon dollars to put towards some kind of elaborate set design. I am an academic with very little film production experience, and as a result, I have a limited number of backgrounds that I can work with here, so please just go easy on me. Anyway, the comparative success of ContraPoints' channel has led other LeftTubers to take influence from and adapt her style to fit their own voices. One of the most prominent examples of this is the channel PhilosophyTube. Creator Oliver Thorne's theater background has always provided a relatively performative quality to his videos, but in recent works he has begun experimenting with costumes or characters or high premises that connect to his argument. These are devices that at least appear to be taking creative influence from Natalie Wynne, even if they do branch off from her style a little bit. Another prominent LeftTuber taking notable influence from the essayistic qualities of ContraPoints is the channel Let's Talk About Stuff, who, particularly in this video about her transition, is incorporating a number of experimental sequences and a kind of meandering, wandering structure that recalls that essay film that we all know and love.
I see a kid who looks physically fit, running around playing with loving parents, doing kid things, never looking depressed or overwhelmed or cold.
There are even some right-wing personalities who, at least on some level, appear to be noticing the effect that ContraPoints is having and taking at least some level of inspiration from some of her stylistic techniques. Milo Yiannopoulos, for example, has recently started uploading videos of himself with costumes and sets, and they are...
Mr. Habibi, no. How did you get a gun? You've been here 9 weeks.
Oh, don't turn that off. I did not expect that to be that bad. No, we're not gonna go there. We're not gonna talk about that. No, sorry. Actually, we do need to talk about this. So, footnote, why does Milo Yiannopoulos have a laugh track? The year is 2019. The laugh track has been basically dead for almost 2 decades now. And even if he didn't know that, why does Milo think that it's anything less than sad that his laugh track is composed of all of 4 people? Like, I feel sorry for Milo. I don't. But I feel like I should. Anyway, that was a tangent. Let's go back to the video. Within leftist YouTube, though, there are 2 other modes of the video essay that I would identify as being stylistically significant within the community. These can be seen to represent 2 different branches of evolution out of the vlog and into a more essayistic structure, though their connection to specifically the essay film is a little bit more limited and debatable than the content we had been describing thus far. The first of these 2 that I will identify is a kind of talking head style. Channels such as Angie Speaks, or Big Joel, or Mia Mulder, or even early PhilosophyTube often fall into this category. In this style, the narrator as the enunciator will sit or stand in front of the camera in what is usually a medium close-up and deliver their script as a lecture. There may be some supplemental materials provided to add clarity to certain points, such as text or images on the screen, or in the case of Mulder's, some smaller experimental elements that appear to take influence from an aesthetic mode similar to ContraPoints, even if they are much less frequent. The second that I will identify is a kind of PowerPoint style. Channels such as Sean or 3 Arrows or Innuendo Studios are included in this category. Here, a disembodied voiceover narration accompanies a slideshow of images and text that supports or builds upon what is being said. These are still lecture-ish in content, but typically take on a less subjective approach to the subject matter, presenting information less as opinion and more as education. These two forms represent a much more dominant mode of the YouTube video essay than what I've been describing in the bulk of this video. And while many of them would map closely onto the high school essay or undergraduate research paper, they do not map as easily onto the form of the essay films of Godard or Marker or Varda. But does that mean that these video essays are definitely not essay films? Well, these texts are still exploratory, still prioritizing an authorial voice, still approaching a problem with the express purpose of solving it. These texts may not take direct inspiration from art cinema traditions, but they are still essayistic in nature. Perhaps then, a useful approach might be to describe the YouTube video essay as having 3 distinct clusters that it can operate within. These are forms that I will confusingly identify for us as the lecture essay, the slideshow essay, and, because I hate you all, the essayistic essay. But it would be unwise to draw hard lines between these, and the genre is continuing to develop. It is not uncommon for one of these forms to pull stylistic techniques from another. And while the aesthetics of the first two have become fairly solidified, the third category is continuing to develop, and not only that, but to influence the first two. It would not be surprising to me if, in the future, these 3 forms began to converge under this essayistic model, brought together by the more performative or abstract qualities to make these video essays more like essay film. Oh my god, okay, I need another footnote because I'm confusing myself and I need to, make sure that I'm clarifying my own positions. Because I'm not even sure what they are. Am I arguing that these video essays are essay films? Or am I arguing that they're not? Actually, I've been super vague this whole time. Did I even, define what an essay film was? Or did I just, draw a word cloud? Well, you're kind of right. And I think that at some point we do need to be honest with ourselves and admit that debating what is or is not an essay film is kind of just a really self-indulgent waste of our time. I mean, sure, it is fun to argue over whether something is an essay based on how argumentative or aesthetically interesting it is, but I mean, by this point, we may as well be arguing about... Part 5. Is a hot dog a sandwich? If we define a sandwich as a form of edible foodstuff in which some variety of filling item is placed between some form of crust structure, then by definition a hot dog is a sandwich. But in a practical context, when referring to the nitrate-infused meal in which a cheap sausage is placed inside a bun, we call that a hot dog. We just do. To call it something else would be confusing. Technically speaking, yes, of course, a hot dog is a sandwich. But were we to concede that a hot dog were a sandwich, it would leave the door open for a taco to be a sandwich, or a Pop-Tart to be a sandwich, or even for chicken nuggets to be a sandwich. And worse, that closes the door for something like an open-faced sandwich to be a sandwich. So what's the answer? Is a hot dog a sandwich? Is a video essay an essay film? The answer is, of course, that nobody cares. We're all still going to refer to a hot dog as a hot dog, even if it is technically a sandwich. We're still going to refer to video essays with language that sounds weirdly close to this form of art cinema, no matter how confusing that might get for film students. And because of the way that the essay form is most commonly used these days, we kind of just associate it way more with the high school research paper than we do with art cinema anyway. And we can't really do much to change that. Yeah, no, not even you, Jean-Luc Godard.
Turn down for what? Turn down for what?
Perhaps more importantly though, if we were to start setting boundaries around what YouTube essays can be considered essays, does that actually help us practically understand the video essay better? Or instead, does it leave the door open for evaluation? Is sorting what is or is not an essay film then just an excuse to draw harder lines around what is or is not allowed to be considered art? Does essay then become an evaluative category that we get to place the texts we like inside? Does this allow us to consider ContraPoints, for example, to be a kind of art essay, worthy of academic recognition and aesthetic value, but then turn around and dismiss a series like the Alt-Right Playbook, very similar in content yet very different aesthetically, with much less clearly defined essayistic aesthetic qualities? But despite that, there's still a lot that goes into the alt-right playbook, and a lot of it is artistic. So I think that drawing these kinds of hard lines around what is or is not an essay film or a video essay would be bad. I think that to resolve this problem, the best thing for me to do is to return to the core tradition of the essay film. You know, emphasizing exploratory modes of thinking and avoiding definitive conclusions. Basically, that's my way of saying that in conclusion, I'm not going to answer any of my own questions.